edition of Paratalk. I'm Gareth, and once again I'm joined by Reeves, the paranormal enthusiast who knows all. Hey, Reeves.
Hi, Gareth. I don't know about all. Maybe a lot, but not all.
Well, this is a good one. This is one that we've mentioned many times on the show before. We're finally getting around to do our own take on the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack. Now, this is something that we've mentioned many times on because there's been a lot of other cases that we've discussed on Paratalk that kind of blend into the Spring-Heeled Jack mythos. So tell us a little bit about it. Let's start with a basic question. What or who is Spring-Heeled Jack?
And that's a very good question. What or who was he or is he? Well, we're going to go back a few years here, all the way back to the early 1800s. He didn't appear, and I say he, because Spring-Heeled Jack was, to most that saw him, a man, a human being, a person.
Right.
He had a few traits that made him stand out from the average person. With more so, which we'll talk about a little bit later, about his dress and the way that he, the way he sort of controlled himself. But more so, Spring-Heeled Jack was a character. Some say folklore, mythos, or something paranormal that appeared in the sort of 1830, 1837. And basically terrorized London and other parts of England.
So how did it begin? What was the first report? What started it all?
Well, the first documented report was actually in 1837, and it happened in London, and it was happened to a man who was on his way to work. Now, he was late, so he decided he's going to take a shortcut, and he went across Barnes Common. Now, before I get too involved with this account, I just want to reiterate and explain to our listeners that aren't in England and aren't familiar with what a common is. If you can imagine a large expanse of land, maybe some forests, like a giant park in a public place. Usually a lot of the cities over here have what we call commons, and it's basically a place where you can go and chill out. Back in those days, it wasn't such a great place to be on your own, because
like,
Barnes Common...
I was just going to say, it's a little bit of the countryside in the city. Yeah,
basically, yeah. To get away from the smog and the burning coal and all that, all the muck.
Right.
But the thing was, these places were they were basically a magnet for the not too desirables in the city, and you could stand a great chance of getting assaulted, mugged, robbed, because these places were kind of out of the way. There was a lot of cover.
Right.
So these places were a little bit, don't be there on your own.
It's a lot like that. Even today, there's certain areas of every city where, especially after dark, you don't want to go. So, going out onto the common, into like the trees and the wooded areas at dark, you're going to be a little nervous. So it makes sense that these kind of legends about these areas would kind of emerge,
Yeah. Well, in the common, in the grounds, there was a church. And this gentleman was walking past the church on his way to cutting through to his place of work. And he recounts that as he approached the church, a figure jumped from the roof of the church, near where the spire was, and down onto the ground, and ran up to him, right up to him, made a lot of noise, and then jumped off back up onto the church and was gone.
It probably scared the living daylights out of him, right?
Totally freaked him out.
But here's the crazy thing.
He ran the west of the way.
Yeah. Here's the crazy thing about what you're saying, though, is not that, someone ran up to him and screamed and scared him, but that somebody jumped from the top of the church spire onto the ground and then jumped back up.
Yeah, and was when he was later calmed down and he recounted his account to other people, he said that the individual, it seemed effortless. There was no effort in what he was doing. He just sort of, from the name, he sprang down to the ground and sprang back up again. So it was like it was like the gravity wasn't there.
Hence the name Spring-Heeled Jack, right? That's I guess
Exactly.
that's the
Exactly. And when he was further questioned, he said, "What's the one thing that you remember?" And he basically recounted that the eyes of the individual seemed to glow red.
Okay.
And now that's quite a bizarre thing to say.
Well, we see now when you say that, I'm immediately thinking of like the Mothman, of the Owlman of Mawan, what we discussed on a previous episode.
Jersey Devil.
The Jersey Devil. They all have this kind of red eye deal going on.
Definitely, and obviously, when this individual had this experience, he told other people, and it wasn't long before the newspapers got hold of the story of this individual's account with what they called them a devil, a madman.
Yeah.
And of course it got into the papers, and unfortunately, back in those days, for the average person, the newspaper was the only form of news that they would get. And
even
correspondence.
Today.
Well, yeah,
even today,
news writers would always kind of, some juicy story like that, they would blow it up and put it on the front page.
Yeah.
And make it a little bit more than what it was.
Right.
And I'm not saying that this is what they did purposely, but in their effort to sell more papers, some papers kind of embellished a little bit and made it sort of bigger. Although a man jumping off of a church roof and running up to you making a lot of noise with glowing red eyes is quite strange. You can imagine the stories that were spun from that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's bizarre from the get-go, but they probably turned it into something, 50 times worse. But, the strangest thing, though, the glowing eyes, that's pretty weird, too. But jumping from, I'm still trying to get my head around that. A church spire it's pretty high.
That's pretty high up. You're
and
talking,
for somebody to jump from that and then jump and then jump back up, that's
effort with very minimum effort.
It makes no sense.
And usually, from what we'll find from witness accounts, usually in one bound or leap. So he's not kind of jumping onto a wall and climbing up. He's just jumping up, and he's back up there.
So the newspapers get a hold of this guy. He tells them what happens. And is that when the name Spring-Heeled Jack was coined, or was that later?
The name Spring-Heeled Jack was a kind of later on with more sightings. It came to be the name that it was given. But after it got into the newspapers, the accounts, after a short period of time, started to spring up. Sorry about that, but they started to spring up not in just the boroughs of London and the outlying villages, but also in other parts of England, in Middle England, in Scotland. As far away as Scotland, there were reports of this strange figure or a figure like it that was doing similar things. Now we could put this down to a form of hysteria.
Sure, yeah.
That people were seeing things that were misidentification, and they were thinking, "Oh my God, that must be that man that I read in the paper, or it was in London."
But they were describing essentially the same figure, right? Performing the same leaping around, jumping, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they were describing the same thing with the same attributes. Obviously, as time went on, more and more witnesses were encountering this individual. And we started to get more of a description of what he looked like. Now,
so what did he look like? What was the description?
Well, some of the best descriptions were that he wore his clothes were quite, I suppose, futuristic. He wore what they claimed to be a large, long coat, which seemed to be made of some sort of oilskin or tanned leather. He was wearing. Now, this is the interesting part. He was wearing these kind of devices on his arms, which seemed to give him elongate his fingers into kind of like spikes. And the most interesting part of the description is that the waistcoat he wore seemed to have some sort of like a metal device that was very tightly strapped to his chest, like a cage around his body.
Interesting.
Now, if we look at this in context of today,
right?
When you wear things like that, climbers wear very tight-fitting outfits and the units, they wear for climbing for their safety. It sounds like something that a mad inventor would create that give him sort of superpowers to move around the place.
No, it does. It sounds like that. I mean, whether or not that's the case, who knows? But it certainly sounds that way. It sounds like there's some guy who's invented something and he's running around like a lunatic. But it still doesn't make sense why his intent was purely just to terrify people. Yeah,
terrify, to mock, laugh. And a little bit later on, start to get quite violent.
Okay. Well, Reeves, before we get really into the meat and potatoes of this story, let's take a real quick break. We'll be right back.
The Mind Tech Podcast is your weekly dose of tech, privacy, security, and conspiracy. Each week, the Mind Tech Podcast will talk about the very latest tech news and the continued threats to internet freedom. Hosted by Garrett Davis and Joe Resington. You can download and subscribe to the Mind Tech Podcast at mindsetcentral.com.
You're listening to Paratalk.
Hi, everyone. This is Gareth from MindsetCentral.com. Just coming on really quickly to talk to you about subscribing or donating to Mindset Central. Right now, we average about 17 brand new podcasts a month on Mindset Central, and that's for free. So you get that content for free. It always has been free, and it will continue to be free. But just take a moment to imagine the time and the effort it takes to put all that together, plus also creating, building, sustaining the website, and the server costs. We're constantly finding ourselves reaching the point that sometimes is the breaking point, and we're up against that old foe of time and money. And we're hoping that with your help, we can break through this wall. Not only do we want to continue with Mindset Central, but we want to build upon it and create something very special on the internet. So please think about helping us and becoming a subscriber. By becoming a subscriber to Mindset Central, you'll have access to the subscriber section, which provides exclusive, all-new podcasts and a lot more. The subscriber section has and will continue to grow into an area that you will want to be a part of. And with monthly access priced at that of a large coffee at Starbucks. So for one coffee, you get access to the subscriber section, packed with content that is continually added to on a weekly basis. So please help us. Help us by becoming a subscriber. Thank you. And we're back. Okay, Reeves, when we just left the hour, we're just going to get into the ins and outs of Spring Heel Jack. But I want to get into some of the other accounts that people reported, other encounters with this creature or man. What are some of the other good ones?
Well, we've got a couple, but just before I start to recount those, I just wanted to say that it wasn't until I'm going to use the word hysteria, but when hysteria broke, the accounts actually got official recognition.
What do you mean by official?
Well, at the time, in 1838, Lord Mayor of London, Sir John Cohen, he decided to look into this case because it was causing so much hysteria that people were actually scared to go out on their own at night. So he decided to set up a number of individuals and to go and interview these people and then put it to debate, put it to some sort of, what are we going to do? And he decided that because some people said it was a ghost, some people said it must be a wild bear, and even some people thought it was the devil himself that had come to London to terrorize people, people that had been bad and they were being punished because of obviously the red eyes and all that kind of stuff. And he looked at all these accounts and he decided that it was moving into the realm of the paranormal, you see, and people obviously were looking at it from a paranormal point of view. And the perspective was kind of paranormal as well.
That's very common, though. Anything that happens that people don't understand will automatically go into either a religious or a paranormal kind of viewpoint.
Yeah. Well, there actually was, at the time, there was a person that they thought that this Spring Hill Jack may have been. And he was a local, I think he was a nobleman that was living nearby, and he certainly had the means and the money to pull off such a thing, but there was no real solid proof that he was doing it. And obviously, one of the events that happened, he could prove he had an alibi because he was somewhere else at the time.
That's weird.
So there were.
You know what just popped in my head when you said that? Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, well, you never know.
Yeah, that's this because it's that kind of vibe, right? I mean, he's a wealthy businessman. He's got the means to do it. He's technically savvy. He could do it if he wanted to, but he's got the perfect alibi.
Well, yeah, but now see, in 1907, there was another individual. There was actually one person before that, Jane Oswell. Now, she was walking home, and she was actually viciously attacked. There was also another young lady that was attacked before that, just after the individual who was walking home a few years back. You've got to remember that this whole thing went on for nearly 70 years. It went on for, and was happening all over the place.
Yeah,
not like once a week, but it
was all throughout the UK. I remember. When I was a kid, my grandmother would talk about Spring Heel Jack.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's pretty. It's amazing.
But some of the attacks were quite vicious. One young lady was on her way home, and she was actually assaulted by this individual. And he tore some of her clothes off and made lurid sort of gestures to her. She managed to get away. But interestingly, she said that his red eyes were piercing, and that he smelt like what she would imagine a corpse to smell like, and that his touch to the skin was cold. So, that's something food for thought there.
Yeah.
Also later on, he started to do, not only was he jumping around and doing these crazy things, but he started to belch blue flame. One young lady in 19...
I was unaware of this fact. So he was he
was able to belch blue flame, apparently.
Yeah.
Not only was he able to jump over roofs and fences, and someone actually witnessed him apparently bound over a terraced house, but
over a house.
In 1907, an 18-year-old young lady was walking home, this is in London, down a Green Dragon alley, which is to put a picture in our listeners' mind, it's one of these old Victorian alleys with high-rise houses on either side.
Right.
So it's a very dark, kind of foreboding kind of alley.
Yeah.
Apparently, she was attacked by this individual, and he belched this blue flame into her face, and it blinded her forever. She was blinded.
Oh my gosh.
That was it, when it started to turn and get violent, and the individual was actually starting to assault people. They decided to put up to get together groups of people to hunt down this person. On a number of occasions, he was actually cornered where there was no.
So they got him. They got him into a certain place where he couldn't get out.
Where he couldn't get out.
Yeah.
These witnesses, on a number of occasions, in different areas that surrounded this individual,
right?
What they were trying to do was catch him with a net or something,
Okay.
But on a number of occasions, he was cornered, nowhere to go. He wasn't able to go anywhere, and some of the witnesses said before our eyes, he just vanished. He just disappeared. So this is why it's kind of moved into the kind of paranormal realm.
Yeah,
you know,
it's very strange. Initially the way he's described with devices on his arms and his chest and able to leap, incredible heights, blow blue flames.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's just some guy with some access to some technology, scaring people. But to vanish in thin air. But then again, how much of this is exaggerated by the eyewitness and the newspapers who report it?
Well, that's the thing. That's the problem. Back then, all we had for a news source really was the newspaper. And so they did embellish these stories somewhat, and that's why it's kind of. It's still, the story today is still as strong as it was all those years ago. But we have still got people today that say they've witnessed this individual.
Wait, even in today, modern times,
modern
21st
day,
century?
The most recent sighting of this character was an individual that had an encounter with him in, I think it was Liverpool in 2012.
You're kidding me.
There's also, at the time, there was one in Lincolnshire in 1887. There was in Liverpool in the 19th century. And then, of course, in modern era, in the late 1970s, there were residents that began to complain of a red-eyed prowler who was grabbing women and punching men. And he said that the individual said that they'd seen this individual and he was able to sort of bound over rooftops, walk down the side of walls, as in defying gravity. So, February 2012, an individual called Scott Martin and his family, they were traveling home by a taxi, and it was about 10:30 at night when they saw a dark figure with no features. He ran across the road in front of them before it climbed over a 15-foot roadside bank in seconds. Yeah. And the family later likened it to the legend of the Spring-Heeled Jack. So this individual or this thing or whatever, it seems to be popping up even in modern days.
Yeah, it kind of won't go away, right? Usually these kind of legends, they have their time and that's it. The fact that we're even talking about this, in the 21st century, when this happened well over 100 years ago, is pretty amazing. The way that this has impacted popular culture is staggering.
Well, that's the interesting thing, because no one has ever actually caught him proper, or they've never identified whoever properly. And that's why, and the extraordinary abilities of the individual, which has been witnessed by many people over the years, that's why it's kind of in the mythos of the paranormal realm and apparitions. If you think about it, it attacks women and it is violent and punches men.
Yeah.
We've got something here that's similar to the poltergeist phenomenon, where it builds a violent, it gets angry. Maybe. I'm just throwing this out here now. Maybe we have the ability as a social group to, when we bring something into being, so many people think about something that they actually create something. They create a phenomenon out of nothing, out of thought.
Yeah, I remember as a kid hearing about Spring-Heeled Jack from grandparents and aunts and uncles, and it was always in association with the devil, with nasty stuff. So now, when Spring-Heeled Jack was at its height, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I kind of feel like it was around the time of the serial killer Jack the Ripper in London. And is there or was there a connection?
Well, connection. Well, I don't know. They're the two most. Jack the Ripper was a real phenomenon, and people were really being murdered. And there were other witnesses where to say that he had the ability to sort of just fade into the shadows and disappear. Spring-Heeled Jack, certainly something happened, and certainly people were witnessing something.
Yeah.
You know,
so there's no real connection between.
I don't think there's a real connection between the two, although it just goes to show that how the two things, in some ways, are similar.
Well, I mean, Jack, the legend of Jack was not even a legend. I mean, it was legitimate. It was a serial killer that killed prostitutes in the late 19th century, and was never caught. Nobody ever discovered who he was, and the reason I say that is because Spring-Heeled Jack the Ripper. These kind of things were going on around the same time. The way they were presented in the newspapers was very sensationalized, over the top. They both had the name Jack. It was. So there's a kind of maybe unconscious connection between the two, but in reality they're not necessarily related.
I think no, because I think the whole Spring-Heeled Jack myth, ethos, whatever you want to call it, it's more in the realms of unexplained, but also there is something paranormal there through the ability to scale walls, and unless he's got some ability to some device or some invention that he's wearing, where it gives him the ability to be superhuman or defy gravity. I mean, walking up walls and scaling buildings with just one leap or one bound. That's just crazy. That's just that's something of science fiction. I say science fiction, but back then maybe.
Yeah. Well, there's only two possibilities really as to three possibilities. One being it's all nonsense. None of it happened, and it was all made up by the newspapers to sell newspapers.
Yeah.
Number two, it's a guy with some kind of technology that was leaping around scaring people, and then the newspapers glommed onto it and exaggerated it beyond belief. Or it's something paranormal.
And also, we've got the religious context as well, where a lot of
the devil is back.
The devil.
Right?
A lot of people were saying that not so much. Mainly churches were saying that it was the embodiment of the devil that was haunting people.
That would tie into the footprints that we discussed on, or the hoof prints rather.
The devil's footprints. Yeah, that was another good
on an earlier episode of Paratalk.
Yeah,
I think we mentioned Spring-Heeled Jack then.
Yeah,
because there's a kind of sort of connection.
Well, there is, because those footprints, they went for hundreds of miles in a totally straight direction, and they went over houses, walls. There was even some points where it actually stopped at a wall and it continued the other side. I mean, a lot of people put it down to people playing pranks with little sticks and people were also saying, well, it was an animal that walked funny or whatever, or it was dragging its tail. Fair enough, but they went through walls,
and we don't really want to rehash that whole episode. But if somebody's listening and they're interested in that, go ahead and look back through the Paratalk archives, and you'll find that. This
is definitely in the same the realm, the same realm.
I mean, I'm thinking about it right now, and I'm just immediately get like visual flashes of Victorian England, Victorian London, the fog drenched streets, the Scooby-Doo foghorn, and then this guy kind of with red eyes leaping over buildings or leaping down from church spires, and it's a very, very distinct mental image that you get in your head from reading or hearing about Spring-Heeled Jack.
Well, some people that had accounts with him, witnesses with him, some people were so distraught that they had to be hospitalized. They had to recover. And some people ended up becoming so ill from their encounter that they died. They were so frightened by what they experienced that they actually got sick and died.
Yeah.
So this, whatever it was they were experiencing, there was, it's like somebody said, I thought I saw something, but I'm not sure. There were people dying, and obviously, we go back to the whole misidentification. Did they really see what they thought they saw, or, did they have that front loading where they read this terrifying story in the paper and they're out late at night? And I mean, London, in Victorian England, as you say, with all that coal, fog, smoke, and that must have been pretty scary with those little alleyways and wandering around there, not knowing if you're going to get mugged or who's going to jump out in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's this crazy devil man on the loose who can jump buildings. I mean, it's going to mess with your head, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's impacted popular culture, not just in the UK, but over here in the United States, too. I mean, a lot of people still know who Spring-Heeled Jack was and or is. I was unaware that there were still reports, but that's interesting. All right, Reeves. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up for this week's show. It'll be interesting to keep an eye out, though, to see if any more reports of Spring-Heeled Jack appear. But it'll probably appear when you least expect it. But we are rapidly approaching October 31st, so who knows? Maybe he'll make an appearance. All right, Reeves, thank you so much. Another great story, and thank you so much for listening, everyone. We'll be back very soon with more Paratalk.